The moment Hyunwoo said 0, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath for a single heartbeat, and then the impossible happened. The massive Vorthon command ship that had been floating in space for the past 6 hours simply stopped existing. It did not explode into flames, or break apart into pieces, or fade away slowly like a dying star. It was there one moment and completely gone, the next, leaving only empty space where 50,000 alien crew members had been living and breathing. Just seconds before, the quantum displacement weapon fired without making any sound or producing any flash of light. The energy beam was invisible to normal sensors and moved faster than thought itself. When it struck the Vorthon vessel, every atom of the ship and everyone inside it was shifted into a parallel dimension exactly like this one, but separated by barriers that could never be crossed. On the bridge of the human destroyer, Incheon commander Mi Young-han watched her tactical displays, confirm what her eyes could hardly believe. The massive alien command ship had vanished from all sensors, leaving no debris, no radiation signature, and no trace that it had ever existed except for the detailed recordings her crew had been making. For the past several hours, the weapon had worked exactly as Dr. Yoon Ji-yoon had predicted during the secret tests conducted in empty space, far from any inhabited systems. The Vorthon ship and its entire crew were still alive in another dimension, where they would continue to exist normally, but they would never be able to return to this universe or communicate with anyone in it. Captain Park and Lieutenant Commander Lee felt a strange, tingling sensation as their personal quantum anchors activated and pulled them back to their home dimension. The emergency transponders locked onto their molecular signatures and kept them tied to this reality, even as everything around them shifted to another plane of existence. For a few seconds, the two humans found themselves floating in empty space where the negotiation chamber had been just moments before. They could see the stars around them and feel the cold of vacuum trying to freeze their blood. But their emergency life support systems activated automatically and created a bubble of breathable air around each of them. The transport beam from the Incheon found them within 30 seconds and pulled them through space back to the safety of the human destroyer. The medical bay was standing by in case the quantum displacement had caused any unexpected side effects, but both officers appeared to be completely normal, except for a slight case of dimensional vertigo that would wear off in a few minutes. Ambassador Hyun-woo materialized on the transport pad, still wearing his diplomatic uniform, but no longer pretending to be anything other than what he really was. Colonel Kim of the Human Defense Force looked around the familiar bridge of the Incheon and nodded to Commander Han, who had been waiting for confirmation that the mission was successful. The quantum displacement weapon had drained almost all the power from the destroyer's fusion reactors and would need at least 12 hours to recharge before it could be used again. But one shot had been enough to remove the most dangerous threat to human expansion in this sector of the galaxy. Yoonji. Yoon was monitoring the weapon systems from the engineering deck, and her instruments confirmed that the displacement field had remained stable throughout the firing sequence. The alien command ship had been cleanly transferred to the parallel dimension without any contamination or bleed-through effects that might have allowed it to return. The remaining Vorthon ships in the area were still trying to understand what had happened to their flagship. Their sensors had detected massive energy readings just before the command vessel disappeared, but they had no way to explain where it had gone or what kind of weapon could make something that large simply vanish from existence. Admiral Tae-hyun Choi opened a communication channel from his flagship, the Seoul, which had been waiting in hyperspace for the signal that the operation was complete. His calm voice carried across the fleet frequency as he gave orders for the next phase of the plan. Now that the Vorthon command structure had been eliminated, it was time to offer the surviving alien ships a choice between surrender and joining their commanders in another dimension. The smaller Vorthon vessels were commanded by junior officers who had never dealt with a situation like this before. Their training had prepared them for conventional space battles with energy weapons and missile exchanges, But nothing in their military education had covered what to do when the enemy could make entire fleets disappear without a trace. Some of the alien captains tried to flee, but they quickly discovered that human ships had been positioned throughout the star system to cut off all escape routes. The trap had been planned for months, and every possible exit had been covered by destroyers and cruisers armed with conventional weapons, as well as smaller versions of the quantum displacement device. Others tried to fight, but their weapons were completely ineffective against the quantum shielding that protected the human vessels. The same technology that had saved Ambassador Kim from the plasma bolt in the negotiation chamber was now protecting entire ships from alien fire. Lieutenant Commander Lee was in the medical bay getting checked for quantum poisoning when the first Vorthon ship transmitted a surrender signal. The alien captain had realized that resistance was hopeless, and that his only choice was to give up or disappear like his commanding officer had. The young human officer smiled as he listened to the translator convert the alien words into human language. Captain Park was on the bridge watching the tactical display as more and more red dots changed to yellow, indicating Vorthon vessels that were powering down their weapons and requesting terms of surrender. The battle that everyone had expected to last for days was over in less than an hour. Quantum displacement weapon had not just removed a single ship from existence, it had broken the will of an entire alien fleet. The psychological impact of watching their most powerful vessel simply vanish was more devastating than any conventional attack could have been. Commander Han received a priority message from Earth High Command, congratulating her crew on the successful test of the new weapon system. The quantum displacement device had exceeded all expectations and would now be mass-produced for installation on human warships throughout the galaxy. Dr. Yoon was already working on improvements to the design that would allow smaller ships to carry the weapon and reduce the charging time between shots. Within 5 years, every human destroyer would be able to make enemy vessels disappear, and the balance of power in the galaxy would shift permanently in humanity's favor. Colonel Kim, formerly Ambassador Hyun-woo, was writing his after-action report when he received word that the Vorthon Empire had officially requested a ceasefire. The aliens wanted to negotiate new terms that would be much more favorable to humanity now that they understood what kind of weapons Earth could deploy against them. The mission had been a complete success, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The word "for" came out of Hyun-woo's mouth like a death sentence, and every person in the chamber, both human and alien, could feel that something terrible was about to happen. The ambassador was no longer the polite diplomat who had been trying to make peace for the past 4 hours. Now he looked like what he really was, a military officer who had fought in some of the bloodiest battles in human history. Captain Park recognized the change immediately. She had served under Colonel Kim during the siege of New Seoul, where he had held off an entire alien army for 6 days with just 300 Marines. She had seen that same cold expression on his face when he gave the order to detonate the nuclear mines that buried 10,000 enemy soldiers under a mountain of rock and steel. General Thexvar finally realized that something was very wrong, but it was far too late to stop whatever was coming. The massive Vorthon was trying to give orders to his guards, but his voice sounded confused and uncertain. For the first time since the meeting began, he could see that the human ambassador was not afraid, and that terrified him more than any weapon could. The alien guards were still pointing their plasma rifles at the human delegation, but none of them were firing. They seemed to be waiting for orders that were not coming, or maybe they sensed that shooting would only make their situation worse. Sub-Commander Vex Toll was frantically checking his plasma pistol, trying to understand why his shot had failed to kill the human diplomat. 3. Hyun-woo continued, and his voice cut through the alien chatter like a knife through cloth. Lieutenant Commander Lee was backing toward the chamber's exit and pulling Captain Park with him. Both humans knew what was about to happen because they had been briefed on the real purpose of this diplomatic mission before leaving Earth. The Vorthons had no idea that the peace talks were just a cover story designed to get human operatives close to their most important military asset. The massive command ship contained the entire senior leadership of the 7th Battle Fleet, plus detailed information about Vorthon military technology and strategic plans. Dr. Yoonji Yoon had spent 15 years developing the quantum displacement weapon in secret laboratories buried deep under the mountains of Korea. The device could remove anything from existence by shifting it into a parallel dimension where it would be alive and intact, but completely unable to return to this universe. The weapon required enormous amounts of energy to fire, which was why it had taken so long to build and why it could only be used once per battle. But the psychological effect of watching an entire enemy fleet simply vanish from existence was worth more than any conventional weapon humanity had ever created, Tu Hyun-woo said, and now his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in desperate battles against impossible odds. Captain Park and Lieutenant Commander Lee reached the chamber door and activated their emergency beacon transponders. The small devices would lock onto their quantum signatures and keep them anchored to this dimension when the weapon-fired General Thex Var was now trying to contact the bridge of his ship, but the communication system was not responding. The massive vessel's computers were being overwhelmed by quantum interference from the human weapon, which was already beginning to charge up its displacement field. The lights in the chamber began to flicker as power was being drained from the ship's main systems. The other Vorthon officers were looking around in confusion as their personal communication devices stopped working and the holographic displays above the table began to distort and fade. Strange energy readings were appearing on every scanner throughout the ship, but none of the alien technicians could identify what they were looking at. Sub-Commander Vex Toll raised his plasma pistol again and aimed it at Hyun-woo's head, but the weapon would not fire. Its energy cell had been drained by the same quantum field that was affecting the ship's systems. The young alien officer threw the useless weapon aside and started to move toward the human ambassador with his bare hands. One Hyun-woo said and smiled for the first time since boarding the alien vessel. It was not a diplomatic smile or a friendly expression. It was the cold, satisfied look of a predator who had successfully lured his prey into a perfect trap. The ambassador had never wanted to be a diplomat. He was a soldier who had been given a mission that required him to pretend to seek peace. On the bridge of the human destroyer Incheon, hidden in an asteroid field 12. Light minutes away, Commander Mi Young-han was watching her tactical displays with intense concentration. The experimental quantum displacement weapon was drawing power from 3 fusion reactors, and the energy buildup was creating gravitational anomalies that could be detected from halfway across the star system. The weapon had been built into the hull of the Incheon during its construction 5 years ago, and the entire ship had been designed around housing the massive device. The crew did not even know what their vessel really was. They thought they were serving on a normal destroyer that happened to have some unusual equipment. Commander Han had served under Admiral Tae-hyun Choi during the Battle of Wolf 359, where human forces had been outnumbered 50-1, but had still managed to destroy an entire Vorthon invasion fleet through superior tactics and desperate courage. She knew that today would either mark the beginning of human dominance in this sector, of the galaxy, or the end of humanity itself. The quantum displacement weapon was ready to fire, and all human personnel had been evacuated from the target area, except for the diplomatic team who were protected by personal quantum anchors. The device would remove the entire Vorthon command ship from this dimension, sending it to a parallel universe where the laws of physics were slightly different, Zero Hyun-woo said, and his smile became even colder. The negotiations had been going on for 4 long hours, and Hyun-woo could feel sweat running down his back, despite the cold air in the chamber. General Thexvar had not moved from his position at the head of the table, and his three eyes never stopped watching the human diplomat. Every demand the Vorthons made was worse than the last, and it was becoming clear that they had no interest in real peace. The aliens wanted humanity to give up 3 entire star systems, including the colonies. Where 2 million humans lived, they wanted all human military ships to be scrapped, and they wanted Earth to pay tribute to the Vorthon Empire for the next 50 years. These were not the terms of a peace treaty. They were the terms of complete surrender. Captain Park sat perfectly still, but her muscles were tense like a spring ready to snap. She had been watching Sub-Commander Vex Toll for the past hour, and she did not like what she was seeing. The young Vorthon officer was getting more and more agitated with every human response. His hand kept moving to his weapon, and his breathing was getting faster and more shallow. Lieutenant Commander Lee was taking notes on his tablet, but he was also watching the alien guards posted around the room. There were 12 of them, and they all carried plasma rifles that could cut through human body armor like it was paper. The humans had 3 sidearms between them, which would not be much use if shooting started in this enclosed space. Hyun Woo tried one more diplomatic approach, hoping to find some common ground that both species could accept General Thexvar. Surely there must be some arrangement that benefits both our peoples. The galaxy is large enough for humans and Vorthans to coexist. Without conflict, we could establish trade agreements that would make both our civilizations stronger. The general made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter, but it sounded more like metal being scraped against stone. Human diplomat. You speak of coexistence, but your species has already proven that it cannot be trusted. You attacked our mining operations in the Kepler system. You destroyed our research station at Wolf 359. You have shown us that humans are a disease that spreads across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. That is not true, Hyun Woo replied, keeping his voice calm even though anger was building in his chest. Those were defensive actions taken only after your forces attacked our civilian colonies. First, we have tried to avoid conflict at every opportunity, but we will defend our people when they are threatened. Sub-Commander Vex Toll suddenly stood up from his chair, and his 3 eyes were blazing with fury. His voice was so loud that it hurt the humans' ears even through their translator devices. Lies, all lies. Humans are parasites who take what does not belong to them. My brother died fighting your kind at the Battle of Tau Ceti, and his death will be avenged. The young alien officer took a step toward the table, and his hand was now openly gripping his plasma pistol. The other Vorthon officers were watching, but none of them moved to stop him. General Thexvar actually seemed amused by his subordinate's outburst, as if this was all part of some plan they had discussed before the humans arrived. Captain Park slowly moved her hand toward her own weapon, but she knew she could never draw and fire fast enough if the alien decided to shoot. She caught Lieutenant Commander Lee's eye and saw that he was thinking the same thing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and there was nowhere to run in this sealed chamber. Sub-Commander. Vex Toll pulled his plasma pistol from its holster and pointed it directly at Hyun Woo's chest. The weapon made a high whining sound as its energy core charged up and blue light began to glow from the barrel. Every human in the room knew that a plasma bolt at this range would not just kill the ambassador, it would vaporize him completely. You humans think you are so clever, the alien officer snarled. But you are just animals pretending to be civilized. Your species will be extinct within 10 years, and I will personally make sure that happens, starting with you right now. Time seemed to slow down. As Vex Toll's finger tightened on the trigger, Captain Park was already moving, throwing herself toward the ambassador, but she was too far away. Lieutenant Commander Lee was reaching for his sidearm, but the plasma bolt would travel faster than any human could react. The weapon fired with a sound like thunder, and the bright blue energy bolt streaked across the chamber toward Hyun Woo. The plasma was so hot that it left a trail of ionized air behind it, and the humans could smell ozone and burning metal. The bolt moved in a perfectly straight line, and there was nothing between it and the ambassador's heart. But then something impossible happened just as the plasma bolt was about to hit. Hyunwoo, a shimmering field appeared around him like heat, waves rising from hot pavement. The energy bolt struck the field and simply vanished. It did not bounce off or get absorbed, it just stopped existing as if it had never been fired at all. The chamber erupted into chaos as Vorthon guards raised their weapons and human security personnel reached for theirs. General Thex Var was shouting orders in his native language, while Sub-Commander Vex Toll stared at his weapon as if it had betrayed him. The other alien officers were backing away from the table, not understanding what they had just witnessed. Captain Park had completed her dive and was now standing in front of the ambassador with her sidearm drawn, but Hyunwoo had not moved from his chair. He looked completely calm, as if someone had not just tried to murder him with an energy weapon. His face showed no surprise and no fear, which was almost as strange as the fact that he was still alive. Lieutenant Commander Lee had his weapon out as well, but he was staring at his commander. With confusion and growing realization, he had seen that shimmer before during classified briefings about experimental human technology, but he had been told that the project was still in development and years away from deployment. The Vorthon guards were pointing their plasma rifles at the humans, but they seemed unsure about whether to fire. General Thexvar was demanding to know what kind of trickery the humans had used to save their diplomat, but his voice sounded less confident than it had at the beginning of the meeting. Hyunwoo slowly reached up and touched something at his collar that looked like a normal translator device, but was clearly much more than that. He looked directly at Sub-Commander Vex Toll, and his expression was no longer diplomatic. It was the cold, hard stare of a soldier who had seen too much combat. The ambassador then did something that surprised everyone in the room, including his own team. He looked at his watch and began to count down in a voice that was perfectly calm and completely terrifying. 5 seconds, he said, and the entire chamber fell silent. Hyunwoo Kim looked out the small window of his transport ship and saw the biggest thing he had ever seen in his life. The Vorthon command vessel was so huge that it blocked out the stars behind it, like a giant metal mountain floating in space. The ship was 15 kilometers long and looked like it was alive with strange lights moving under its dark surface, like glowing blood in veins. The transport pilot was nervous, Hyunwoo could tell, because the man kept checking his instruments every few seconds and wiping sweat from his forehead, even though the cabin was cold. The pilot had good reason to be scared. The Vorthans were known across the galaxy for being cruel and for destroying entire planets when they got angry. 3 years ago, they had turned the human colony on Zaris Prime into glass and dust. Just because the colonists had refused to pay tribute, Hyunwoo adjusted his diplomatic uniform and checked his translator device one more time. He had practiced the Vorthon greeting ceremony 100 times, but he still felt worried. What if he made a mistake? What if the aliens took offense at something he said? What if they decided to kill him right there on their ship? The weight of 5 human star systems rested on his shoulders, and he could feel every gram of that responsibility. Behind him, Captain So-Young Park sat quietly checking her weapons. She was not supposed to have weapons on a diplomatic mission, but Hyunwoo had insisted. The Vorthans might respect the rules of diplomacy, but they also respected strength, and Park was one of the strongest fighters in the human fleet. She had fought in the Battle of New Seoul, where human marines had held off 10,000 alien invaders for 6 days straight. The transport ship shuddered as it entered the docking bay of the massive alien vessel. Hyunwoo could hear the mechanical sounds of the bay doors closing behind them, and he knew there was no going back now. The air in the transport felt thick and hard to breathe, not because anything was wrong with the life support, but because everyone knew they might not make it back home alive. Lieutenant Commander Jin-Ho Lee stood up from his seat and straightened his uniform. He was the military advisor for this mission, and he looked calm, but Hyunwoo noticed that his hand kept moving toward his sidearm, even though he probably did not realize he was doing it. Lee had studied Vorthon military tactics for 5 years, and he knew better than anyone how dangerous these aliens could be. The docking bay was enormous and filled with strange machines that hummed and clicked like giant insects. The walls were covered in that same organic-looking material that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Several Vorthon soldiers waited for them wearing armor that looked like it was grown instead of built. Their weapons were pointed at the ground, but everyone knew they could be raised and fired in less than a second. General Thexvar was waiting for them at the entrance to the main corridor. He was 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin that looked like dark green leather. His 3 eyes focused on Hyunwoo with an expression that was hard to read, but definitely not friendly. The general wore no armor, but the humans could see scars all over his body that told the story of dozens of battles. The translator device crackled to life as the general spoke. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together, and the words that came through the translator were formal but cold. "Welcome, human diplomat, to the vessel. Eternal victory. I am General Thexvar, commander of the 7th Vorthon Battle Fleet. You will follow me to the negotiation chamber, and you will not deviate from the path I show you." Hyunwoo bowed in the Vorthon style, keeping his eyes down for exactly 3 seconds, as protocol demanded. "Thank you for agreeing to these talks, General Thexvar. Humanity hopes that we can find a peaceful solution to our current difficulties." The words sounded weak even to his own ears, but diplomacy required careful language even when dealing with enemies who might decide to kill you at any moment. The walk through the ship took 20 minutes, and every step showed how advanced Vorthon technology was, compared to human engineering. The walls seemed to grow around them like they were walking through the inside of a living creature. Strange lights moved through tubes that ran along the ceiling, and the floor felt soft under their feet, like walking on skin instead of metal. Other alien crew members stopped what they were doing to stare at the humans. Some looked curious, but most looked angry. The humans had been fighting the Vorthon Empire for 3 years now, and both sides had lost many ships and many lives. The crew of this vessel probably had friends who had died fighting against human forces, and they were not happy to see their enemies walking freely through their ship. Captain Park kept her eyes moving constantly, watching for threats and memorizing the layout of the corridors. She noticed that there were weapons mounted in hidden panels along the walls, and that every intersection had at least 2 guards posted. The Vorthons were taking no chances with their human visitors, but they were also making it clear that the humans were completely surrounded and outgunned. The negotiation chamber was a huge room with a curved ceiling that showed images of space battles, where Vorthon forces had won victories against various alien species. Hyunwoo recognized some of the battles from his studies, including the destruction of the Cathari homeworld and the conquest of the Rilix system. The message was clear: the Vorthons were winners, and they expected everyone else to surrender to their power. A large table dominated the center of the room, made from what looked like polished bone from some enormous creature. Holographic displays floated above the table, showing star maps and fleet positions. The humans could see their own territories marked in red, while Vorthon space was marked in gold. The difference in size was not encouraging. Several other Vorthon officers were already seated around the table, including Sub-Commander Vex Toll, who was younger than the others and had a reputation for being even more aggressive than most of his species. His 3 eyes fixed on the humans with obvious hatred, and his hand rested on the grip of his plasma pistol. General Thexvar gestured for the humans to sit in the chairs that had been provided. The chairs were too large for human bodies and clearly designed to make the visitors feel small and uncomfortable. Everything about this meeting was intended to show the humans that they were weak and that resistance was hopeless. Lieutenant Commander Lee activated his recording device to make sure that everything said in the meeting would be preserved for analysis back on Earth. The Vorthons noticed this but said nothing. They had their own recording equipment running. and everyone expected that every word would be studied by intelligence officers on both sides. Yunwoo took a deep breath and prepared to begin the most important conversation of his life. The future of humanity depended on what happened in this room. Over the next few hours, he had studied every aspect of Vorthon culture and psychology. But he also knew that one wrong word or gesture could end the talks and restart a war that humanity might not survive. Admiral Taehyun Choi stood on the bridge of his flagship Seoul, watching the scattered Vorthon fleet through the main view screen. The alien ships hung motionless in space like lost children who had just watched their parents disappear. Their formation had completely broken apart when the command vessel vanished, and now they drifted without purpose or leadership. The Admiral opened a communication channel that would reach every remaining Vorthon ship in the system. His voice was calm and professional, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had just demonstrated the power to erase entire fleets from existence. "This is Admiral Choi of the Human Defense Force. Your command vessel attempted to murder our diplomatic representative. Under a flag of truce, that action has consequences." The silence that followed lasted for nearly a minute before the first alien response came through the translator. A younger Vorthon officer who had probably never expected to be in command of anything. More important than a patrol ship was now the ranking survivor of what had been the Empire's most powerful battle fleet, Human Admiral. "This is Acting Commander Zoltak of the vessel Crimson Spear. We do not understand what happened to General Thexvar's ship. Our sensors detected massive energy readings, but we cannot explain where our flagship has gone. What kind of weapon can make something simply cease to exist?" Admiral Choi smiled. But it was not a pleasant expression. "The kind of weapon that shows the galaxy. What happens when someone tries to murder human diplomats during peace negotiations? Your General Thexvar and Sub-Commander Vextol are still alive. Acting Commander. They are breathing and thinking and probably very confused about where they are. But they will never threaten human civilians again." On the bridge of the destroyer Incheon, Dr. Yoon-ji Yoon was monitoring the quantum displacement weapons power systems and checking for any residual energy that might indicate dimensional bleeding. The weapon had performed flawlessly during its first combat test, but she wanted to make sure there were no unexpected side effects that could affect the local space. The scientist had spent most of her adult life working on theoretical physics in laboratories that officially did not exist. Her research into parallel dimensions and quantum mechanics had been classified at the highest levels because the military applications were too dangerous to allow enemy species to learn about them. The quantum displacement technology was based on discoveries made in ancient ruins on Mars that had been left behind by a civilization that existed millions of years before humans evolved. The alien artifacts contained mathematical formulas that described how to manipulate the fabric of space and time itself, but it had taken human ingenuity to turn those formulas into working weapons. Colonel Kim was in his quarters changing out of his diplomatic uniform and back into his military clothing. The deception had been necessary, but he was glad to stop pretending to be something he was not. He had been a soldier for 20 years before being asked to pose as an ambassador, and every minute of the peace negotiations had felt like torture. The truth was finally being revealed to the stunned alien survivors. The human diplomatic mission had been real, in the sense that Earth genuinely wanted peace, but it had also been a carefully planned military operation designed to eliminate the Vorthon Empire's most dangerous leaders in a way that would terrify every other hostile species in the galaxy. Captain Park and Lieutenant Commander Lee were in the briefing room watching recordings of the Vorthon fleet's reaction to the disappearance of their command ship. The alien officers were clearly in shock, and several of their vessels had suffered complete breakdowns of discipline as crew members panicked about what kind of enemy they were facing. The quantum displacement weapon was not just a military tool. It was a psychological warfare device that could break the will of entire civilizations. The knowledge that humans could make fleets vanish without a trace would spread across the galaxy within days, and every hostile species would have to reconsider whether attacking Earth colonies was worth the risk. Commander Mi-Young-Han received a priority transmission from Admiral Choi, ordering her to prepare detailed technical reports about the weapon's performance for immediate transmission to Earth. The success of the operation would lead to massive funding increases for quantum weapons research and production. The smaller Vorthon ships were beginning to respond to the Admiral's ultimatum. Some captains were requesting permission to surrender, while others were asking for clarification about the terms of any ceasefire. Several ships had already powered down their weapon systems as a gesture of good faith. Acting Commander Zoltak transmitted another message, and his voice sounded much less confident than it had during his first communication, Admiral Choi. "What are your terms for the survival of my remaining ships? We have 40,000 crew members who had nothing to do with Sub-Commander Vex Toll's actions." Human Admiral considered the question carefully. The goal had never been to commit genocide against the Vorthon species, but rather to demonstrate that attacking humanity would have consequences that no rational being would want to face the surviving. Aliens could serve as witnesses to spread word of human capabilities throughout their empire. "Your ships will surrender all weapons and submit to inspection by human boarding parties." Admiral Choi replied, "Your crews will be treated according to the laws of war, but your vessels will be confiscated as compensation for the unprovoked attack on our Diplomat. You will be provided with transport ships to return to Vorthon space, where you can report what happened here today." Dr. Yoon was already working on modifications to the quantum displacement weapon that would make it smaller and more efficient. The current version required an entire destroyer to house it, but she believed that within 5 years, the technology could be miniaturized, enough to fit on cruiser-class vessels or even large fighters. The psychological impact of the weapon was already spreading beyond the immediate battle zone. Other alien species throughout the sector were receiving reports about the mysterious disappearance of the Vorthon command ship and trying to understand what kind of technology could accomplish such a feat. The Kralex Consortium had been planning their own attack on human colonies, but those plans were quietly canceled within hours of receiving sensor data from the battle. The insectoid aliens decided that trade negotiations would be much more profitable than military confrontation with a species that could erase fleets from existence. Colonel Kim received a coded message from Earth informing him that his cover as a diplomat had been officially ended and that he was being promoted to general with command of the new Quantum Warfare Division. His expertise in both military operations and alien psychology made him the ideal person to oversee the deployment of displacement weapons throughout the human fleet. The Etherian Council had been neutral in the conflict between humans and Vorthons, but they immediately opened diplomatic channels with Earth after learning about the quantum weapon. The energy beings were fascinated by the technology and wanted to discuss possible scientific exchanges. Even the mysterious void dwellers who normally ignored the activities of corporeal species sent a brief message acknowledging that humanity had achieved something remarkable. The ancient aliens had been watching galactic civilizations rise and fall for millions of years, and they recognized the significance of weapons that could manipulate dimensional boundaries. Acting Commander Zoltak finally transmitted his formal surrender along with requests for mercy for his crews. The young alien officer had realized that resistance would only result in more ships disappearing, and he chose survival over pride. His decision would save the lives of 40,000 Vorthon soldiers and civilians. Admiral Choi accepted the surrender and ordered his fleet to begin boarding operations. The captured alien vessels would be studied to learn more about Vorthon technology, while the crews would be interrogated about their empire's military capabilities and strategic plans. The battle was over, but the war had been won not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the demonstration of a technology so advanced and terrifying that entire civilizations would think twice before challenging humanity again. The news traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every major civilization in the galaxy. Within 12 hours of the Vorthon command ships, disappearance-detailed sensor recordings were being analyzed. In alien laboratories from the core worlds to the Outer Rim territories, every species that had ever considered humanity a potential threat was now asking the same terrifying question: what other impossible weapons did the humans possess on Earth? President Jin A. Moon called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council to discuss how to handle the sudden shift in galactic politics. The quantum displacement weapon had worked beyond their wildest expectations, but success brought new challenges and responsibilities that humanity had never faced before. The Kralex Consortium was the first major power to respond to the demonstration. They were a collection of insectoid species that controlled mining operations throughout dozens of star systems and had been planning to demand tribute from human colonies. Their ambassador arrived at Earth within 3 days, carrying offers of trade agreements and technology exchanges. Dr. Yoonji Yoon found herself promoted to Director of Advanced Weapons Research with a budget that was larger than the entire gross domestic product of most planets. Her laboratories were expanded, and she was given access to alien artifacts that had been kept secret for decades, including devices recovered from crashed ships and ancient ruins. The Etherian Council sent a delegation of their energy beings to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. They had existed for millions of years without taking sides in galactic conflicts, but the quantum displacement technology represented something they had never seen before, and they wanted to understand how corporeal beings had achieved such mastery over dimensional physics. General Hyunwoo Kim, formerly Ambassador Kim, was appointed as Earth's first galactic security coordinator, with authority to negotiate treaties and make decisions about the deployment of quantum weapons. His years of military experience combined with his recent diplomatic training made him uniquely qualified to represent humanity in a galaxy that now feared and respected human capabilities. The surviving Vorthon ships had been escorted back to their home territory by human destroyers, and their crews had spread the story of what happened to General Thex Var's flagship. The Vorthon Empire officially requested a ceasefire within a week and offered to negotiate a permanent peace treaty that would give humans everything they had originally demanded, plus significant territorial concessions. Acting Commander Zoltak, who had surrendered his ships after the command vessel vanished, was promoted to general by his own government and put in charge of Vorthon diplomatic relations with humanity. His first-hand experience of human quantum weapons made him the perfect advocate for peace among his own people, who still wanted revenge for their military defeats. Captain Park and Lieutenant Commander Lee were both promoted and assigned to the new Quantum Warfare Division, where they would help train other human officers in the tactics and psychology of using displacement weapons. Their experience during the diplomatic mission made them valuable instructors for crews who would soon be operating similar devices, the smaller alien species that had been caught between human expansion and Vorthon aggression suddenly found themselves with new options for survival. Many of them applied for protection under human military umbrella, offering their unique technologies and resources in exchange for security guarantees. The Void Dwellers emerged from their dark nebula for the first time in thousands of years to make contact with human explorers. They were ancient beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and they were curious about how such a young species had developed technology that could manipulate the fundamental structure of reality. Commander Mi Young-han was given command of the first production quantum displacement vessel, a massive battleship. Designed specifically to house the improved version of the weapon, her ship, the Busan, became the flagship of a new class of vessels that could project human power across the galaxy without needing to fire a single conventional shot. The quantum displacement technology was being adapted for civilian use as well. Dr. Yoon's research team discovered that the same principles could be used to create instantaneous transportation networks that would allow humans to travel between star systems, without using traditional faster-than-light drives. Other alien civilizations began sending scientific delegations to Earth hoping to learn about human physics and engineering. The species that had once dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers now competed with each other to establish research partnerships and cultural exchange programs. General Kim received reports from human intelligence services throughout the galaxy confirming that several planned attacks on human colonies had been quietly canceled. The mere possibility that Earth might use quantum weapons to defend its citizens was enough to deter most potential aggressors. The Vorthon Empire signed a comprehensive peace treaty 6 months after the battle that granted humans control over 12 star systems and established permanent trade agreements between the two species. Former enemies became reluctant partners as Vorthon leaders realized that cooperation was much safer than confrontation. The galaxy entered a new age where the balance of power had shifted dramatically in favor of humanity, not through conquest or destruction, but through the demonstration of technology so advanced that resistance seemed futile. Alien species that had ruled portions of the galaxy for thousands of years now had to consider human interests when making decisions about territorial expansion or resource allocation. Dr. Yoon continued her research into quantum mechanics and parallel dimensions, discovering new applications for displacement technology that could revolutionize everything from manufacturing to medicine. Her work attracted the attention of alien scientists who had been studying similar phenomena for centuries but had never achieved practical applications. Human fleet expanded rapidly as more ships were equipped with quantum displacement weapons, but the devices were used primarily as deterrents rather than active weapons. The psychological impact of knowing that entire enemy fleets could simply vanish was more effective than any conventional military force. Small conflicts still occurred throughout the galaxy, but they were quickly resolved through diplomatic channels when human mediators arrived with quantum-equipped ships. Both sides, in any dispute, understood that escalation could result in one or both of their fleets being displaced to another dimension. General Kim established protocols for the use of quantum weapons that required approval from Earth government before any displacement device could be fired. The power to erase ships and their crews from existence was too great to be used casually, and humanity was determined to be responsible with their new capabilities. The galaxy had learned that humans preferred peace and cooperation, but were prepared to defend themselves with weapons that seemed to come from science fiction rather than military laboratories. The age of human expansion through superior technology had begun, and no alien civilization wanted to be the next to test whether Earth was bluffing about its quantum capabilities. 5 years after the disappearance of the Vorthon Command ship, humanity had become one of the most respected and feared species in the galaxy, not through aggression or conquest, but through the demonstration that they possessed technology that could remove any threat from existence permanently and completely.